Catherine Trebeck.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, morning everyone. I hope you're feeling really happy because that's the best way to think about the economy. And the title of my talk is Why the Future Needs to be a Wellbeing Economy, but I want to offer a bit of a provocation and also an invitation. So I've added a bit of a subtitle of basically the economic basis of happiness. And of course, we get told a lot, different ways to create happiness. I've just come back from 17 years in a beautiful mountainous country full of smart, cheeky people with amazing accents. So my main tip is that you can go to Scotland for happiness. But of course, we're so often told that it's all about consumption. The route to happiness is just buying more things and having the big house on the North Shore, having the trendy kitchen. And these cartoons are lovely. And then just a few weeks ago, I was in a cafe and I saw this image. Just order it. You can order your happiness, click, 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 get another delivery, get the doorbell coming, another package, and you'll be happy. And of course, so often, big brands like Coca-Cola tell us that happiness is as easy as opening up a bottle of Coke. Self-help gurus will tell us that the route to happiness is within us, and all you have to do is change your thinking and your mindset, no matter how dire our circumstances. And my little newsagent in Glasgow, down the road from me, where I used to live, has a sort of a suite of magazines, and there are about 4 or 5 of them, all with the title Happiness, Well-being, Contentedness. And so I opened up their pages and looked, well, what are they saying? What are the routes to happiness that are being proposed by these particular magazines? And it's things like take your dog for a walk, do some meditation, have your friends around for wine, go on a yoga retreat in Thailand. And that's all very well. But the problem is there is a very real material basis underpinning those apparent routes to happiness. So if you're one of the 1 in 6 people in Australia who's living below the poverty line, you're going to struggle to afford to have your friends around for wine. If you're one of the 1 in 4 people in Australia working in casual work, it's going to be really hard because often you're doing multiple jobs to find time to take your dog for a walk, let alone go on your yoga retreat to Thailand. And if you're being evacuated by the floods that are sweeping across Queensland and across Victoria and across New South Wales, it's going to be very hard to find some time to meditate, though you may very much need it. And so what we see is that all these external prescriptions on how to be happy almost forget that so often these forces are beyond our control. And so is it any wonder when we've got an economic system that is doing a much better job of serving those at the very top than serving the rest of us? When we saw that the top 10% of people in Australia have 40 times as much wealth as the bottom 10%. Is it any wonder that we see levels of antidepressant use rising, 1 in 3 young people saying they are lonely, people at the bottom of that income spectrum experiencing more heart disease, more diabetes, and more depression? So that is the challenge. And the recipes that we are so often given by politicians and by political lobbyists and policy geeks is what I would say are 20th century recipes. These are things like, or now I'm back in Australia, I can say Band-Aids, but essentially survival by Band-Aids, putting a sticking plaster on the problem. Short-term, downstream, patch, repair, treat. We don't often sit back, channel our inner 3-year-old and ask, but why, but why, but why, and look upstream to the root causes. And so what we see is downstream responses. And this to me is just a staggering example where people who were sleeping rough in Wales were often stab-proof sleeping bags that could be stab-proof coats that could be turned into sleeping bags. What did they really need? Shelter, safety, decent form of income. So we're going to these Band-Aid solutions. We're putting sticking plasters over what are actually structural, systemic problems that are related to how our economic system is designed and purposed. And we also know that there's a huge price tag behind all that downstream patch, repair, respond, ameliorate. And it's this idea of failure demand, that so much social policy, so much of what charities spend on, is driven by our collective failure to create a context in which people are safe, in which they're healthy, in which they have enough income to participate in society, in which they can thrive. And so just a few weeks ago, we heard in the budget huge amounts being spent on disaster responses because of the natural emergencies induced by climate change. We see huge money, millions going back into community services because the increase of the demand by more and more people being vulnerable because of the cost of living crisis. We see huge amounts being pledged to mental health services, treatment, downstream responses. And what we should be doing is saying, yes, that is absolutely important. We absolutely need to help people survive and cope today and tomorrow, but it's not good enough to stop there. We need to stop and channel our inner 3-year-old and look upstream to the root causes. And the other 20th century recipe we have is individualisation of responses. So much of the onus of change is put on individuals to be more resilient, to become more employable, to change their thinking. The onus is put on the individual to change when they are battered by forces beyond their control over decisions taken elsewhere. And so what can we have instead? This is this idea of a well-being economy. Before I tell you a bit more about the well-being economy, I want to unpack the term well-being, because there's a dual meaning to well-being and how I see it. And I used to, and actually I wrote a blog about this probably about 5 or 6 years ago, saying that focusing too much on your individual subjective well-being is like turning up the volume on your headphones while a riot rages around you. And then I saw this ad, and you'll be able to find it on YouTube. It's from Audi, and it's this sort of dystopian riot going on, ninjas throwing nunchucks and flames and people kicking each other and bashing each other. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible image. And so while this guy's friends are being bashed and the hair torn out by the baddies, this chap finds his way to escape into an Audi car. Miraculously, something hands him a glass of champagne. He's drinking champagne, seeing his friends being beaten up by these baddies outside. The feet warmer comes on. He's all nice and cosy. And so his subjective well-being, according to Audi, because he's in their beautiful cosy car with his glass of champagne and his feet warmer on, is quite high. But outside, community is collapsing. People are hurting. People are stressed and anxious and hitting each other. And so a well-being economy is about looking upstream to those circumstances, to the collective, to the societal situation, to the conditions of everyone's well-being, and thinking about how can we turn our attention there. So at its most basic, it is about designing our economic system so that it delivers social justice on a healthy planet. And that's quite easy to say, but it requires a fundamental repurposing of our economic system, away from seeing the economy as a goal and an objective in its own right, to really thinking about how the economy can be in service of what people and planet really need. How can it deliver things like fairness, participation, connection, and dignity? And how can it recognise its role as a subset of our human societies and as a subset of our precious, precious ecosystems? That requires a huge amount of change. So how do we go about building that sort of economic system? How do we go about creating an economy that's in service of what humanity really needs, rather than the other way around? So it's going to take a whole plethora of changes, from the very, very local right up to the supranational. A whole suite of changes in our taxes, how we do energy systems, how we design our cities, how we do democracy, what sort of business models we need, what sort of policy instruments, what sort of activities we subsidise, how we measure progress. But if any of you were stuck during lockdown doing jigsaw puzzles, so just think about all that 100,000-piece jigsaw, all those different changes you're going to need. What do you do when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle? You start with the corners. So I'm going to tell you the 4 corners of all those changes we need to build an economic system in service of us rather than the other way around. And these are the 4 Ps of purpose, prevention, pre-distribution, and people power. And so purpose means thinking, let's be fair weather friends of economic growth rather than its ever faithful followers, as so often we see. Thinking about what sort of growth do we need, in what locations, how do we get it, and who needs it, rather than just blindly assuming that if we grow the economy bigger, as measured by GDP, everything else will be solved. Because we have seen in the last few decades that hasn't happened, and we're pushing Mother Nature beyond what she can handle. So it means understanding the difference between means and ends, the economy as a means rather than an ends in itself, and paying attention to the composition and the direction of growth, rather than just obsessing about incremental quarterly increases in gross domestic product. And at the micro level, for individual firms, this means thinking beyond short-term quarterly profits, but seeing profitability and economic viability of a firm as a vehicle rather than a destination itself. So that's purpose. Prevention is saying we have to do better than spending on failure demand and putting band-aids on the damage that our economic systems do to people and planet. It is saying let's look upstream and understand the root causes and take action there. Pre-distribution, it's a bit of a clunky term, but it's a really awesome concept. It's essentially saying we need the economy to do much more of the heavy lifting in generating the sort of more equal, just outcomes, rather than letting the markets in the economy rip, generating huge levels of economic inequality and injustice, and then turning to government at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and saying, oh, just maybe do a bit of redistribution through a bit of tax and a bit of welfare transfers, with the political fraught process that entails. And you see that with the debates around stage 3 tax cuts. And so pre-distribution is saying, let's design the economy in a way that it gets things right first time round. More economic democracy, better wages, maybe even wealth taxes, those sorts of things, community wealth building. And finally, people power. This is making sure that people are at the apex of economic decision making, whether that's economic democracy or more participatory forms of political decision making. And you will all, I suspect, be involved in loads of examples of that. How do we have a better dialogue about what sort of economic system we need and who it's designed for? So with those 4 Ps, we can start to build an economy that nurtures what really, really matters for people and planet, rather than obsessing on economic growth that so often is captured by those at the top and which is putting too much pressure on Mother Nature. And so I want to finish with my invitation to you. This is an image that was put up during COVID, during the first few weeks of lockdown in Glasgow. And I was reading this beautiful quote that a revolutionary moment in the world's history, of which we have certainly just come through and are facing today, is a time for revolutions, not for patching. Not for those sticking plaster, band-aid, downstream treatment, ameliorative responses. These words were written by Sir William Beveridge in the midst of the Second World War on the front pages of the document that laid the basis for the NHS and the UK's welfare system. So if he can dare to imagine a whole new system, we can certainly dare to imagine an economic system that delivers much better results for people and for planet. And so my invitation to you is to see yourselves as part of that economic system change movement, join the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and use your influence, your skills, your energy to champion and have more conversations about an economic system that's not a goal in its own right, not standing above us, dictating to us, treating us all as just-in-time inventory and treating the planet simply as an input to production and then spitting out our effluent into the beautiful rivers that we've seen this morning. Be part of this conversation of building an economic system that is fit for the challenges of the 21st century and also is worthy of its original meaning of household management. Thank you so much for having me.